We're getting a late start today because the jury and the judge took a trip to the Murdaugh property.
Judge Newman presiding. Be seated.
Good morning. Anything before we bring the jury? Yes, sir.
Now we have the defense calling a sidebar, more than likely to complain some more about prosecution, like they did yesterday, with the prosecution calling rebuttal witnesses. Today's supposed to be closing arguments. My personal opinion, the outcome's going to be a hung jury due to Alex Murdaugh's pill addiction. That's my personal opinion, that it's going to be a hung jury due to Alex Murdaugh's pill addiction.
The jury is present, sir.
All right, thank you. Let's wait till everyone gets settled. Welcome again, once again. Day number 27. And you have heard all of the testimony, received all of the evidence. You've visited the scene of the alleged crimes. And Mr. Waters.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Good morning. It's been a long trial, hasn't it? On June 7th, 2021, at the Murdaugh property in Colleton County, Maggie Murdaugh and Paul Murdaugh were brutally and maliciously murdered at the kennels by Alex Murdaugh. Paul, as you know, suffered 2 shotgun blasts. Maggie suffered 5 blackout rifle wounds. And after an exhaustive investigation, there is only one person who had the motive, who had the means, who had the opportunity to commit these crimes, and also whose guilty conduct after these crimes betrays him. The defendant is the one person who is living a lie. The defendant is the person on which a storm was descending. And the defendant is a person where his own storm would actually mean consequences for Maggie and Paul, and consequences for those who trusted him. And that person is the defendant, Richard Alexander Murdaugh. I know this has been a long trial because it's a complicated case. And I'm not going to talk forever, I promise. But I am going to try to distill this down for you. And the first thing I want to do is set the stage. And to set the stage, we have to understand a little bit about Alex Murdaugh and who he was and who he is. He was a person of singular prominence and respect in this community. But he's also a person who's been able to avoid accountability for all of his life. while he was outwardly giving the illusion of wealth and a very lucrative law practice, some bad land deals and that sort of thing, exacerbated by the economic recession, led to some financial problems. And then he had some big cases in the early 2011, 2012. And all his partners, and you've heard testimony to this, thought that that had taken care of things. You've heard cases like the Thomas case and the Pinckney case and the Plyler case and the Badger case. But the evidence that you've heard shows that the defendant became so addicted and so dependent on a velocity of money that the millions of dollars in legal fees that he was receiving was not enough. And so he started to steal. And how did he steal? He stole by billing personal expenses to the firm. He stole by stealing from his own family. You heard the testimony about the check he stole from his brother Randy. But then the main ways were two schemes that he developed. And the first one was to get checks made out from the client trust account to Palmetto State Bank, to fast talk the staff and fast talk the clients with those disbursements, and then take it to Palmetto State Bank, where his buddy Russell Lafitte would convert those and use those to pay personal expenses. And each time, until the end, it worked because the client was also getting a big check. And they were walking out of there thinking that everything had been fine when it was not. But then in 2015, it was paid out to the Forge account. And once he did that, he would convert those to his personal use. And to do that, though, he also had to fast talk staff and fast talk clients. And that scheme continued up until everything fell apart in the end. The other thing you have to understand is during this time when he's earning millions of dollars and stealing millions of dollars, he's also borrowing millions of dollars from wherever he can. The bank, his law partners, his father, and it still wasn't enough. And this slow burn was continuing and continuing until the boat crash happened in February of 2019. And that changed everything. That set in motion things that were going to happen because of the criminal charges related to that case as well as the civil charges related to that case. And in the aftermath of the boat case, things changed. The pace of his stealing increased. In fact, that's when he stole the money from Tony Satterfield that you heard from. Ultimately stole about $4.5 million between the Satterfields and others. And unlike other cases, Tony Satterfield, who was the son of his longtime housekeeper, he took all the money. Took every bit of it. And that was coming to a head as we move into the spring of 2021. Because there had been some publicity, and you heard from Tony Satterfield that he was, the defendant reached out in the spring of 2021 because there had been publicity and saying, hey, I'm still working on the case, everything's fine, I'm still working on the case, it's good. But the reality is the defendant didn't have that money to pay it back. And he had one saving grace. Because as you've heard, they don't get paid until the end of the year. And his saving grace was the Ferris case, which they tried in December. They get the verdict and get paid in March, and that's when he convinces Chris Wilson to send those $792,000 of fees to him. But the problem is that only lasted for about 2 months. $792,000 only lasted for about 2 months. And then he's running out of money again. Meanwhile, you've heard in the boat case that Mark Tinsley was seeking to get a large personal recovery from Alec Murdaugh of $10 million because he thought, as many people did, that he was wealthy and had a lot of money. And when they and you've heard testimony about whether or not that had been granted, but it doesn't